Hey, welcome back. You're listening to This Week in Creationism, episode number 42. I'm your host, Joel Duff, and here I take a look at the headlines in the world of young earth creationism from the past week. Well, okay, the last month in this case. Today we're going to talk a little Ken Ham on Twitter, some things he's been saying about Twitter and censorship and free speech and creationism. We're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about Answers in Genesis Capital campaign. They're fundraising for a number of different projects and a very large recent purchase they made of a large building, and we'll talk about what they're going to use that for. We'll get into a little of what was Eve's blood type, and I got a couple other small items coming up. So you ready for all this? Okay, well, let's get after it after my short intro. Okay, here we go. Answers in Genesis for the past month has been running this particular header on their Answers in Genesis website. Right, they have a scrolling banner that usually includes like their most recent stories. And this particular item has been kept in that scroller for a solid 3.5 weeks. It just got rolled off, but it's been replaced by yet another fundraising campaign, which is sort of like their last minute right before New Year's fundraiser. So this is obviously something that they're putting a lot of emphasis behind. And so let's take a look at what they're doing. And the way they roll out some of their newer items and their newer reason why they need you to give to their ministry is to be the influence, right? See us on Fox News, get answers, give today. That was their pitch. Several weeks ago, they rolled out a new advertising campaign. Infomercials, basically, short things that were on Fox, broadcast on Fox News, pitching ideas and things that Answers in Genesis is interested in, and then hoping they'll come to this website, again, see this particular information here. And what you would get is, if you clicked on that particular link or followed the link that they provided in their advertising, is you would get to this page, Be the Influence. Parents, are you tired of influences outside your home shaping your child's minds or your kids' minds? Well, you're not alone. Answers in Genesis can help. Prepare to make the biggest impact from inside your home. Give today. And what are you giving to? You're giving to Answers in Genesis, who is going to give back to you a safe environment for your kids to get the answers, the correct answers, right? The answers from Genesis. None of this is going to mention anything about science, because that's not really what Answers in Genesis is about anymore. Science is kind of a side topic to draw people in possibly with certain questions, but they're really interested in answering the big questions of life for people and providing this particular environment. And this is going to feed into what I'm going to show you in terms of their campaign and the types of things they're adding to their different amusement parks. So if you scroll down that page, you get to things like answer difficult questions. It takes courage to seek answers to difficult questions. Answers in Genesis delivers answers to equip the future generations. All right. Below are excerpts of our most popular pocket guides called Social Issues. You notice that their most popular pocket guides or answers pamphlets are not about questions about how old the earth is or about evolution, but they're about social issues today. Providing an overview on topics in the guide. All right. For a complimentary complete ebook, which is the actual pocket guide, which I always find kind of funny because we still call these things pocket guides, and yet obviously you're not going to take your ebook and slip it into your pocket, right? Consider donating to Answers in Genesis. And then they have a whole series of questions which you can see, like, get a flavor for what types of answers are they providing in the pocketbook. Here's some of the biggest questions people have, and you can reveal those answers to you. We're not going to go over those. You know that on This Week in Creationism, we don't talk a whole lot about the sort of the social issue side of their ministry. We're more interested in the actual ministry structure itself for different creation ministries, but also, and more so, some of the science and some of the things they say about science. Now, if you scroll down to the bottom of that page, what you eventually get to is you get to the, like, here's where you can give your money. Give today. All right. We're dedicated to discovering new ways to create resources that resonate with everybody. And Answers in Genesis needs your help to expand our reach. With a gift of $25 or more, we'll provide you a complimentary download of our Social Issues Pocket Guide. There's their Pocket Guide again. You're going to download on your computer. Now, and I just want to point out here, you'll notice that at the time I screenshotted this, which was about a month ago, you could donate by credit or debit, but you could also donate by, try this again. You could also donate using your crypto. I wasn't too surprised to see this here. They've been doing this for a while. They've added crypto fairly early on. It kind of fits with the profile of a typical follower of Answers in Genesis. Many of them are into cryptocurrency. And there's certainly no single type of person that's interested in cryptocurrency, all right? But there are a large number of people that are into young earth creationism and Answers in Genesis who are. Now, what's interesting, and the reason I'm really pointing this out is because I just checked yesterday and to see where they're at. At the time, a month ago, they were at about I think it was like $2.2 million raised at the time that I had taken a first screenshot. And now, just today, and today is I believe it's the 27th of December, they've raised $12 million of their $20 million goal. So they're well on their way to meeting that $20 million goal. And of course, their goal is to get it by January 1st. I don't know if they'll actually get it by then, but they'll get it soon afterwards. But what's missing here? There's no longer an option anywhere on their pages to give in the form of cryptocurrency. And I'm sure that's partly because of the crash of cryptocurrency right now, right? They probably received some donations in cryptocurrency a month ago. And now those donations may be worth 50% or maybe 75% less than they were before, or a quarter of what they originally were. And so it doesn't do a whole lot of good to take donations which are losing value over time. And so they've removed the crypto option for donating to them. Or you can donate straight to their core ministry. But the Ark Encounter thing is their new expansion, and you might say that this is new dollars. They're asking for above and beyond contributions here. The 12 million that they've raised is above the typical 10 to 14. I haven't looked in the last 2 years to see where they're at in terms of donations, but we'll say 10 to 14 million dollars of income that they have coming in per year, most of which is donations. They are making money through some of their other operations. So it's almost doubling the amount of operating budgetary money that they'll have. Of course, this money is set aside for a building campaign. All right, so what are they doing with this money? Why are they asking for $20 million? So in a blog post that Ken Ham posted about a month ago now, he was talking about how they're designing and working on one of the biggest models of Jerusalem in the world that's going to be installed at the Ark Encounter. I think in its own building, not actually in the Ark itself. The Ark is basically pretty full at this point in terms of displays. But they're constantly adding on other buildings. I mean, they have a whole workshop area. They have a whole training center, classroom type thing, and a big conference center, right? And they're going to build several other buildings on the grounds as well that will house some of these things, right? So they're building this huge Jerusalem exhibit. And at the same time, the part of their master plan is to add future other attractions, right? Which includes, and this is the thing that came out earlier last year, and we've already talked about this, that they would like to add the Tower of Babel, which would teach, and for them, what that means is teaching the true origins of people groups and nations that deal with racism, prejudice, and so forth from a biblical worldview perspective. And I expect that's where, like Nathaniel Jeanson's genetic Y chromosome work on ancestry will probably be highlighted in that particular facility, assuming they're still believe that his work is any good by that point, which I see any reason why they wouldn't, other than the fact that he can't seem to get any support from anyone outside of Answers in Genesis for his particular viewpoints. Our designers, what was I going to say? Oh, yeah, they're going to develop another welcome center at the Ark. So yet another place where both are going to build something out in the parking lot. The parking lot's actually separated, and you have to park, and then you have to take a bus, like a little bus that comes in and takes you to the Ark Encounter Park itself. And so there's a welcome center when you first get to the bus, while you're, what they hope will be, you have to wait in a long line, and so you need something to look at and do, probably something to purchase as well. And then you get to the actual Ark Encounter, and there's kind of another entrance there, and there you have another welcome center, and you have another bookstore and so forth. And then you enter in, and you have a variety of things to choose from to do. So they have this end-of-year campaign to build this Jerusalem model and a welcome center, and that's all this is for. Just the welcome center and the Jerusalem model. All right, that's $20 million. We're not even talking about the Tower of Babel yet, which presumably will be a reasonably sized building, right? Basically another museum, essentially another creation museum housed on the site of the Ark Encounter. And so here's an artistic rendition of now currently there is right over here, there's a large conference center. And so I've been to talks at that conference center there. And then you walk from the conference center and you go through the Rainbow Gate, which is the main entrance to the park. And then the main feature, of course, is the Ark. I find this artistic recreation kind of funny, because they have this huge grassland out here when actually this is a ravine over here going off there, and there is no land higher because the whole complex is on top of a hill, basically a hill that's been flattened off. All right, and then they're building this park on it, so everything else drops off around it. Just a side thing. All right, now at the same time, a couple weeks later, after all this campaign was going and so forth, and this turned out to be very quietly done, because it was never really talked about on the Answers in Genesis website. I think they finally have acknowledged that's happened now, but there's not been a big fanfare about this. It just happened, and now they've revealed that it happened after the purchase, which is kind of understandable. They probably couldn't reveal that they were in the bidding for this particular building. But this is from, I think this was from the Cincinnati Enquirer. Answers in Genesis, group behind the Creation Museum and Ark Encounter buys former Toyota headquarters, not the main headquarters, but one of the headquarters in the United States, for $31 million. And that's the building right there. It's some over 200,000 square feet of space. And this whole business complex, right? So they bought this for $31 million, and what they plan to use it for is to expand the school. All right, so Answers in Genesis, several years back, they partnered with a church, which I believe was Ken Ham's church, Baptist Church, in Florence, Kentucky, to begin a school called 12 Stones. And it's a Christian school. And after that, now Answers in Genesis has essentially taken on the school itself completely. So they are now running the school. I don't know exactly what the business relationship there is and how it's divvied up in terms of the budgets and control and so forth. But it's essentially an Answers in Genesis enterprise now. And so they're going to move this school over to this $31 million facility. And hoping to expand to having 1,000 students, whereas they started with just 100 or so originally. And this is quite the facility, all right. And it won't be just used for a school, but it's now, you can think of it as their social media, media complex, because this is where they have their TV studios, production outfits for making videos and TV shows and so forth. Answers in Genesis is constantly expanding to become more of a social media enterprise themselves, or a media enterprise. They have they got a big YouTube station, but really they have their own Answers TV. And they have their own site that you can buy a subscription to, which has all their videos, but also has been collecting other Christian video content. Some of it's exclusive to their channel, others it's on many, many other channels as well, but packaged together as essentially a safe space. This all go back to the theme and to their advertising on Fox News. You know, your family, your kids can find a safe environment with Answers in Genesis, because we're going to provide them with answers for all their questions about life, and within the confines of our particular social network. And so Answers in Genesis is growing, just constantly expanding its footprint all the time. Just to give you an idea of where they're at now. So you have the Creation Museum up here. This is the border right here between Kentucky and Ohio. And so Cincinnati over here. So they're just in northern Kentucky here. Down here is where the Creation Museum is, right? And then all the way down here, you've got the Ark Encounter down in Williamstown. And you've got, I don't know what it is, a 50-minute drive or so, a 45-minute drive between the two. Now, this new complex that they've just purchased is right here. All right, right at the confluence, where these two freeways, 275 and 71, come together. So this is a big business area. And I have circled here also Florence. Florence is where Ken Ham's church is, the church he attends, and the majority of the board of trustees and so forth would live in this particular area. I would imagine a number of employees also live, and his family lives in this, I'll call it this general region of Kentucky. And so now you're going to have this school right here, along with this media group, expanding group. Oh, here's a Google Maps shot of it right here. So here is the former Toyota headquarters right here, and so they've got this little driveway going out across these two little ponds, and you got a nice parking lot and all that, right? It really is a pretty amazing facility, and pretty amazing for $31 million, really. But let's just think about the $31 million. He's asking for $20 million for donations to get him to $20 million so you can build, a welcome center and this 3D recreation or this model of Jerusalem, right? That's $20 million. And then at the same time he's asking for the $20 million, he comes up with $31 million. And I think he had to come up with the cash for this to buy this building outright. And so they've got $31 million just sitting in the bank there. They buy this building, and they're going to have to spend millions of dollars to retrofit the building for school use. Right? Wasn't built to be a school. And then to build all the media outfit from it. And so you can see what's happening here. All right. They're going to progressively become the one-stop shop. All right. For Christians of a certain persuasion to find their media. They're going to have they'll have TV, and they've always done spots on different radio stations, or have little ads or other things on different Christian television stations. But I would imagine the grand plan is to eventually have their own TV station, right? Their own network, right? They have got their own websites. You will pay subscriptions, right? A subscription service to a variety of different things, all right? In other words, they are their own Disney network, right? They're going to produce their own movies. They already sponsor like a Christian film, film competitions and so forth, right? So they're trying to inspire a generation of people to generate the type of content that they're going to include inside of their own network. And so you can continue to immerse yourself in Answers in Genesis stuff. There'll be more and more and more of it. And as they're able to answer more and more questions and provide more and more of your needs, there's less and less and less you need from the outside world, right? Becomes a more exclusive, protective environment. Let me go back to this map. I forgot one thing about the Ark Encounter. The other thing that's happening is, in addition to purchasing this building up here, right? So a large facility, which I was just saying, is going to need a lot of money spent on it in order to retrofit it for their use. You have to remember down here at the Ark Encounter, they're not just building a new welcome center and this Jerusalem model, but on the grounds, just south of the Ark Encounter, on the same hills, on their property, they're building a whole complex of dormitories. And I think the first dormitory is actually done, and the dormitories are going to be for seasonal workers, and maybe eventually people are even more than just seasonal. They're having trouble, honestly, they're having trouble finding enough employees to help, in the summers during the busy time. It's not just anybody who can take a job at Answers in Genesis. You're going to have to answer a whole bunch of questions correctly in order for them to make you eligible to be employed for them. And there's only so many people in the Williamstown area that are going to be able to answer the questions in the affirmative. So they end up trying. They're trying all the time to get parents who have kids all around the country who want to send their kids to do some voluntary work, because great, if they volunteer, that's even better, because they don't have to pay them. But they need a place to stay, and this is kind of a remote area, so they're building this housing. And of course, the advantage of having the housing is that if you have the housing, well, then they don't even have to leave the campus, right? The Ark Encounter campus, right? You can get your food there. All right, there'll be a cafeteria. They'll have their own Bible studies, and they'll probably even have church there. Although I would expect they probably bus people up to Florence to go to church up there. But you can be sure, if you're a parent and you're like, hey, this is going to be a great summer job, or really a summer experience, right? Helping out with the Ark Encounter, this great ministry. And so I'll send my kids down there. I know they'll be safe because they're going to be in these dormitories, and they're going to be surrounded by people that are going to be watching over them and making sure they don't get into any trouble, right? Definitely not going to be any alcohol there or any kind of bad things happening. I don't know if they're allowed to play cards or not, but you get the idea, right? This is a very safe environment now. And so, but that's just the beginnings of, you put more and more in there. Eventually you have, essentially what you have is you have a compound, right? You have a completely protective compound to keep people in and to keep the outside world away. And now you can have you can say hey, here you've got internet there, but your internet's only connected to, I don't think they're this way now, but you can see how this type of thing can happen. Hey, you've got the internet, but I'm sure, absolutely sure, that the internet they have at the Ark Encounter probably has all kinds of, safety measures for pornography and so forth. Totally fine. But it's hey, if you want to watch something, we got Answers, we got Answers TV, right? Well, what more could you possibly want other than Answers TV? We're certainly not paying for subscription to the Disney Network because they're woke. And so we're gonna have our own network replacement. So the whole point, the reason I'm just going on about this is just that this is not. If you think that Answers in Genesis is just about young Earth creationism and about Genesis, and they've built an ark and they have a creation museum, and this is a place where true believers go just to confirm their faith. No, this is something where Ken Ham and those who are building this enterprise, they have much grander visions. All right, their vision is that they are a ministry, but it's a ministry network in which they don't go out as much anymore. They just bring people in, right? They bring pastors in, they bring other people. They have conferences there, and they're teaching the world from this place. And they're doing it at this physical location, but they're more and more and more turning into a media conglomerate that will then spread the word in multiple different formats at the same time. So this is what makes Answers in Genesis a really different thing than, say, Institute for Creation Research, which I think ICR, Institute for Creation Research, when it was in California before they moved to Texas, I think they had these kind of dreams. In fact, remember, Ken Ham originally came to work for Henry Morris and and Answers. An Institute for Creation Research. But I think he saw that they didn't have the vision he had. They were still really stuck on the science side of things, and doing science. I mean, Answers in Genesis doesn't really do science, right? There, I've said it many times before. They're users of other creation scientists to provide information for them, and they do a little bit of themselves. But they are something much more. They are an apologetics ministry. They're a defense of the Christian faith ministry, not just we deal with this one topic within the purview of Christian ministries, which is how do we deal with the questions that surround Genesis. And so I think ICR at one time was trying to build out, but they were just, I don't know if they didn't have the right leadership. It wasn't the right time. It was sort of before the internet. And Answers in Genesis has just been a lot more savvy and skilled and professional in their production value. Whereas ICR was always kind of, on the cheap, even though they, donation-wise, they were the best off at one time. Now they've actually built their own creation museum, right, down in Texas and Dallas area. And it's a pretty nice looking place, but chances are, if you're not really into young earth creationism, you may have never heard of it before, unless you live in that local area. It hasn't made a big splash in terms of like, this is something that people all around the country know about, that Christians are flocking to Fort Worth, Dallas area in order to go to the ICR, Discovery Science Center. No, in fact, I'm not even sure I got the name right? That's how, I'm into watching all this stuff, and yet I don't even hardly know anything about that ICR museum. That's how little it's talked about. It's like there are like no reviews on the internet. There's no pictures. There's no, I've tried to learn about it. I can't find out anything about it. So okay, there it is. That's the thing about the campaign that's going on for Answers in Genesis. I guess the bottom line is they have a lot of money. And some people thought that they outbuilt themselves with the Ark encounter, and they're gonna doom themselves. And I never thought it would happen quickly. I've always thought that yes, it is very possible you can outbuild yourself, because infrastructure costs a lot of money. So their infrastructure cost is constantly increasing, and if their donations ever take a dive, they'll be stuck with infrastructure costs that will be hard to handle, and the Ark encounter will become a giant white elephant. But that's not any time in the near future. And the fact that they're getting into all this media stuff means there's really a massive opportunity for other avenues of income. And so they're not just going to be as dependent on people just donating money to them. I don't think the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter are really truly money-making operations. I don't think that although Ken Ham likes to hype their attendance, it would take a lot of attendance to pay for the Ark Encounter as expenses. And so there's still a need for donations to keep the ministry alive. But I think that all these other things they're doing have an eye on, these are income generators, and eventually those income generators will be able to support long-term these other ventures. And so I think that Answers in Genesis is here to stay for a while. All right, next item. This is from today. Ken Ham on Twitter. More and more people are waking up to how the media and others have been censoring people. But they've been doing that to Christians like us at Answers in Genesis for years. And it's good people are now being told they should question the establishment, check out the science. But sadly, the secularists have increasingly not allowed creationists to question the beliefs of evolutionary naturalism when true observational science clearly goes against it. People need to understand the difference between observational science, technology, things that build things, and historical science, things that encompass beliefs about the past. This is his dichotomy between the two kinds of science in his mind. He needs to go watch my videos and lots of other Christians who talk about this and his misconceptions in this area. But this is what he loves to say all the time, as if this were some important distinction. Notice in this third tweet here, molecules to man, evolution is not an observational science. It's actually part of man's religion to try to explain life without God. And then he has to toss in this. The climate cult is another part of man's religion. He's very much gone down the route now of climate denial and climate change stuff. And that's very much more becoming incorporated into Answers in Genesis materials. All right, but let's go back really quickly. So what is he highlighting? What made him think he needs to say something and tweet out this stuff today? Well, of course, it's a Fox News article about how Twitter users are either upset or super excited about Elon Musk declaring that Twitter must follow the science, right? And I think he's saying this in a positive way, that this is opening up Twitter to hopefully like being more able to follow the real science, which for Ken Ham, the real science is the Earth is young. All right, I don't want to get into Musk's Twitter and what exactly free speech is. I will say that Ken Ham has a teenager's type understanding of the history and complexity of what free speech is and how it works, or how it has worked in the past, or what I'll say what the complex issues are about how free speech should be controlled and who should do the controlling. Because there's nobody who believes in 100% free speech, that you should just be allowed to say anything and everything you want. And so it's always a question of where the parameters are, where are the boundaries. And of course, Ken Ham thinks that the boundaries should be marked out very differently than other people do. And you can see that here. But here's the thing. When he talks about this, and he shows a article that's referring to Twitter and Musk, and this whole article on Fox News is about how Twitter, needs to be more open to, diversity of thought, and be more open to and not have all this censorship that's going on. And he's talking about censoring, and then he mentions that, but they've been doing that to Christians, media, and others. I know he's not saying Twitter necessarily. If you read that carefully, he's not actually specifically talking about Twitter, but he certainly gives the idea that Twitter is doing this. And other media, he talks about how the media have been censoring people. I start thinking, where has Ken Ham been censored? Where has Ken Ham been told he can't speak? Now, it's true. There was a university that canceled one of his talks once. And there are other places that have disinvited him, including several Christian groups that have disinvited him from speaking. And I'm sure he would say that they're woke, or they're censoring him as well. But when I think about something like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, when I think about social media, and that's kind of the thing that people are talking about, is what is proper censorship on social media companies that are public companies. Well, it's not actually, Twitter's not a public company anymore, it's private, so really Musk can do whatever he wants. When I think about that, I think to myself, who's been censored? Who's been blocked? Right? Has Ken Ham ever been censored on Twitter? Has his tweets been removed? Has he been removed? Has he been blocked from being able to use any of these social media outfits? I don't think so. I mean, I'd be really interested if anyone knows of any young Earth creationists that has been removed or censored from any of these sites. And if you know of somebody that's been censored, a young Earth creationist who has had their account either deleted, blocked, turned off, all right, stopped for a period of time, I want to know, what was it that they said? What did they post that resulted in them being removed, all right, and being censored? Was it because they said the Earth was young? Was it because they questioned whether evolutionary theory could explain the origin of certain types of organisms? I've never seen it. I just haven't. I've never seen that kind of censorship of that particular topic. And yet he paints himself as being, oh, we Christians here, maybe like Christians like himself, we're being censored constantly, for years and years. I just don't see where the censorship is. Yes, if he were to have one of his scientists like Nathaniel Jeanson write up some of his work and send it to the Journal of Genetics to try to get it published in its current form, I'm pretty sure the paper would get rejected because it's just downright bad science and it has a lot of flaws. That's not exactly censorship. Now, he's going to perceive that as Nathaniel Jeanson is proposing something that is contra the going belief, right, of modern science, and that's why they're rejecting him. And so we're being censored. But that's in a very specific outlet that type of censorship is occurring. And yes, there may be biases. And I just did a whole talk on peer review and some of the issues with peer review. And there are personalities and there are issues with peer review. But in terms of like social media, Ken Ham if he were to try to promote his campaign, right, for the Ark Encounter on some media sites, they might decide not to show those ads, like for the Super Bowl or something like that. Somebody might make that decision. You call that censorship. But companies can decide what's good for their brand or not. And Fox News is willing to show it. As long as somebody's willing to show it, there is the ability to communicate your message. And I think through all these social media outlets, young Earth creationists are fantastic at using them. And I just don't see where they're being censored. I don't see where their posts are being downweighted. I don't see where maybe they have some data to actually show that they have been censored. But again, I want to know specifically what they've been censored for. All right. What exactly was the thing that they were told, this is the reason we're not going to show this content, right? I'd be interested if anyone wants to comment on that. Okay, couple other real quick items. Real fast. I'm just showing this from Institute for Creation Research to remind you that ICR is just like way out there on their own on a lot of ideas among young Earth creationists. So here they have an article, massive tsunamis generated by the flood, not an asteroid. This is a response to the several different articles and actually several different places where there's been evidence of tsunamis or seishes, which is not exactly a tsunami, but it's a large movement of water, horizontal movement of water, that related to the asteroid impact from 66 million years ago. And if you remember me talking about this at all in the past, you know that Institute for Creation Research pretty much denies that comet ever struck the Earth. All right, they deny that the crater down there in the Yucatan Peninsula was the result of an impact from outer space. Whereas the other creationist organizations seem to accept that, and they try to work that into their model of the flood. They just try to deny that altogether. And they say that the tsunamis that are evidenced in this portion of the geological column were not the result of this impact, but they're the result of the flood itself. All right. So they continue to push this particular, every chance they get, they try to divert the attention away from the comet explosion, as opposed to other creationists who essentially accept the evidence of comet impact and try to reinterpret that data within a global flood, but keep the impact. All right, that's all I wanted to say about that. Creation Ministries International. They kind of got me thinking when they posted this on, was this on Facebook, I guess? Oh no, maybe this was Twitter. Eve would indeed have had the same blood type as Adam. Why? Because Eve was made from Adam, right? So logically, if Eve was made from Adam's rib, and Adam had ribs that had DNA in them, and Adam's got 2 copies of his genome, And on those 2 copies, there would have been 2 different versions, potentially 2 different versions of blood type. So we're talking blood type here, we're talking about the ABO blood system, 1 gene or 1 location on a chromosome. And at that particular location, there are, if you know the basic blood types, it's like you can have A type blood, B type blood, AB type blood, because you can have an A from mom and a B from dad. So you could have both of those. And you could also have O type blood if you don't have A or B. All right, so that's 4 different blood types, or well, I'll call them phenotypes, expressions. And so then the question is, and this actually was a question from a reader. A reader wrote in, it's like, if there's 4 blood types today and you have Adam and Eve, how could you get all 4 blood types from just 2 individuals? And so here's what CMI says. They're saying, okay, first part of our logic is Adam and Eve, or Eve would have had the same blood type as Adam, because Eve was made from tissue from Adam. Adam's tissue could have only had a certain blood type, right? It could have been B or A or O or AB. And what they've done here is they've chosen, well, the best scenario is that Adam had AB type blood, right? So if Adam had AB type blood, then Eve would have had AB type blood, in which case she could have had children that had A blood, B blood, or AB blood based on how basic genetics works, Mendelian genetics. But that leaves something out, right? Where did the O come from? Right, so there's only so much room on the 4 alleles, the 4 variants that Adam and Eve could have in total to be able to make blood type, and that's not enough variants in order to make all the blood types we see today. All right, so how do they explain that? So how do we explain the O blood type? As documented over 20 years ago in my paper, and I think this is blood types and their origin, the O group probably arose from an information-losing mutation of A. So he's saying A might have changed into O. Because it is so common around the world, it must have arisen in population breakup at Babel, perhaps even before the flood. The thing is, there are a lot of people that have O-type blood. It's one of the most common blood types in the whole world. There are parts of the world, especially South America, where it's the dominant blood type. So if Adam and Eve started out with AB type blood and it didn't even exist in the original creation, how come it is that most people have O-type blood today? So this is an interesting case because, and it kind of got me thinking about things, because if AB was like the perfect blood type, right? Because Adam and Eve were made perfect, right? They're in the garden and everything is like exactly right. Or even if one had AB type blood and maybe Eve had A type blood or B type blood, got it from Adam. O type blood is a mutation. And it's an information losing mutation. And by that, they mean that if you make A-type blood, you have a protein you make that's called the A antigen. And if you have B-type blood, you're making a protein that's on the surface of your blood. And so that's what A and B are. And if you have the A and the B, it means you have 2 different alleles. One's making A, one's making B, and you have both of those proteins on the surface of your red blood cells. And your immune system recognizes that as you have A and B. Well, what's O-type blood? O-type blood is the inability to make one of those proteins. And so the protein doesn't get put on the surface of the blood. So your blood surface doesn't have any of those protein antigens on them. And so if you have 2 copies of that, if both of your parents gave you a copy of the O allele, then you can't make any of these proteins. So therefore you have this, what we call O-type blood. And so in the world of creationism, this would be a degeneration. Right? This is a mutation that results in a new variation that didn't exist in the original creation, and results in people having potentially O-type blood. And in fact, we look around us and we see that that's one of that's the most common allele, the most common variant in the human race is the O-type allele. And so it's the mutant version that's actually the most common. I suppose the reader that asked this question, I think they should have followed up and said, well, why didn't they have O-type blood and the O became A or something like that? But they see this as a loss of information, right? Whereas the A and the B, they would call a gain. And they just call that relative to each other because one makes a protein on the surface and the other one doesn't make a protein on the surface. And so having a protein on the surface is more information in their understanding of information. So in their mind, how did it become so common? Well, it must be that the mutation happened like maybe one of Noah's sons or maybe Noah himself had this particular mutation. So a couple of people that came through the flood had this particular variant. And then when they spread to different parts of the world, they carried it there, and that's why it became so common. All right. Now, I want to tell you what was not in this description. And I know this because my class, my genetics class, one of the projects they do during the classes, I do a molecular genetics laboratory. And in that laboratory, we extract DNA, and then we amplify the gene, a portion of the gene of the ABO blood system. And then from that portion of the gene, we look for different variants in that gene. And based on what variants are there, we can determine blood type of individuals. In other words, we're doing genotyping, figuring out what the genotype is, what versions of genes do individuals have. And then from that, we can figure out their phenotype, which is what we call blood type. Here's the thing. There's more than one A allele. There's more than one variant of A. There's something called A1. There's something called A1V, variant 1. And there's AV2. There's a second variant of AV1. And there are actually more versions of A and B. But O, there are at least 10 different versions of the O allele. So there are, if you have, the two most common are called O1 and O2. And if you have O-type blood, you don't necessarily have one version from one parent, one version from the other that's the same. You may have two different O alleles. Both of those alleles don't make the protein or make the protein correctly to put it on the surface of your blood. And so you could be what's called a heterozygote. You could have two different variants, and yet they look the same to you in terms of, we call it O-type blood. So when you just say like, oh, all these people have O-type blood, it turns out there's a lot of different types of O. And so at a more more specific level, there's lots of different variations. Now, Adam and Eve could have only have had, if they were AB, their A would have had to been a specific variant of A. And yet there's multiple types of A variants today. So I could have A-type blood. I could be A1V2, A1V2, where both of my parents gave me the A1V2 allele, not the A1 allele. The A1 allele might be the original allele. There's lots of things one has to consider when one tries to figure out what the original variants were. But the point is that there are lots of different alleles. Now, primates also have ABO blood, right? Chimpanzees have A-type blood, B-type blood. They can be AB blood. They also have O-type blood. But their O-type blood is different than our O-type blood because they have different variants of O. So I think Answers in Genesis, Creation Ministries International is actually right in the sense that O is a derivative of A. But it's been derived in many different ways, many different times, in many different populations. It's not a single event. So like this happened one time right before the flood or in one of Noah's sons. That couldn't be like the one thing and then it spread. It's more like it's happened many times and started many times in other places. And so they're kind of missing that portion of the story. And so I kind of forgot why I had these. I was looking up papers on ABO blood system for my class, and we've been talking a lot about all these different variants because we've been actually exploring the variants and see what kind of, like, whether there are actually small differences in the phenotypes of them such that there's actually more than just AB and O blood phenotypes. And it turns out when you go out and you look at individuals that have O-type blood and you sequence their genomes, because now we're able to sequence whole genomes, what you'll find is that, the reason you have O-type blood is different than the reason this other person has O-type blood. And you can see here they've put, like, this particular paper. I don't remember when this was. This is in 2004. They've deposited some new accessions from their study in just one small area, or one hospital, and they did this study of O-type alleles, and they found an O-type and O2-3, something called O4. Actually, they had O2-2, O2-3, O4, O5, and O6. Right, so they discovered several new alleles. And we can think of it as if you have a gene that's got thousands of base pairs of A, T, C's, and G's. The O1 allele is a particular mutation at a particular position. And that's a fairly common place to have this mutation. And most people that have that same mutation are probably related to one another. Not necessarily, because they could have had that same mutation separately, uniquely. But what we find out is that there's other places that can have mutations that also change the conformation of the protein such that it's not placed on the surface of the cell. And therefore, that also creates a lack of a protein on the surface of the cell, which we call O-type blood, because the immune system doesn't see the protein on the surface. But the underlying genetics are different. All right, the whole point of this is that genetics is a whole lot more complicated often than the simple stories that we tell about different phenotypes that we recognize, or expressions of genes that we sometimes recognize, like this simple ABO system. It's a really complex system. And then when young Earth creationists start trying to answer questions about, like, okay, well, what was Eve? Not understanding that complexity, it's not really much of an answer. But I thought, honestly, there was something else I was thinking of when I saw this. It started me again thinking about, what does Dr. Carter and others at Answers in Genesis, or Creation Ministries International, what are they picturing in their mind when they view the origin of Eve? I think Sephardi has written an article, which he mentions here, on Eve and blood type. And it has a lot more than the simple article that this one's referring to. And he talks about, okay, was it a rib? And then he thinks it was a rib, although I think the Hebrew refers to side, like half a person rather than just a simple rib. Okay, that's a whole nother story for another whole nother time. So their arguments are like, they're trying to figure out the genetics. And so what they're doing is they're visualizing Adam is there and he's asleep, and then a rib is taken. So in their mind, a rib is a piece of flesh. That piece of flesh has certain genetics, right? So and the genetics would be if they had cells that had A and B in them. Each one has A and B. So there's a rib cell. And from those ribs, we're going to take the A's and B's, and we're going to take those cells. And then I think what they imagine is maybe taking that rib and then like causing a whole bunch of cell growth to happen really, really fast. Because I think most of the time they envision this as happening. By the way, most people think, and most Christians and theologians have tended to put the creation of Eve as being like right there on the sixth, well, of course, on the sixth day. Because in the first chapter of Genesis, it talks about male and female being produced on the first day. So that means Adam had to have been created, named the animals, and then Eve was formed on that same day. All right, so but what they're envisioning is that however Adam was made from the dust, like dust was just like molded into a human and then all of a sudden made into cells, right? Everyone would acknowledge that that has to be a miracle if that's what happened, all right? Then you have Adam, and he's got flesh and blood. And now you have Eve being taken from Adam. So that's the cells from Adam. And then that must be somehow like, if you were standing there watching it, what would you see? I guess that's always kind of the question, right? What would that look? What would that have looked like? A hand going into Adam's side and then ripping out a rib, and so here's this bloody rib. And then as you're watching it, it begins to grow. It's kind of like a cartoon type thing. superhuman, superhero movie type thing, and you have this super fast growth, and then it grows and it forms into the body of a woman, who then maybe God breathes into. Although it doesn't actually say anything about that; it just says Eve's made in God's image as well. All right, now if that's the case, those cells are just like actively dividing, I guess, like dividing every half a second, the cells divide into more cells. And I think what they're envisioning is that, well, a cell is a living thing, and then the cell has DNA in it. So the DNA must have also divided and copied itself and then into the new cells. And so everything in Eve would be a replicate of what was in Adam. And this had to happen DNA replication had to happen at 50,000 times the pace that it happens today. But nonetheless, it's just copy until you have a whole lot of cells, and you make another person out of that. Now, here what they're saying is, well, of course, Eve would have been AB as well. If Adam had AB type blood and she's made from the cells being copied from Adam, then she would also have AB type blood. But why? Well, I mean, I get it. I guess that's a logical conclusion. But is it necessary? I would say not necessary at all, right? And you know one reason why that's the case. Because if Adam's cells, which were somatic cells, not sex cells, in a rib, were just duplicated to make another body, then Eve would have been a man, right? Because she would have had an X and a Y chromosome. And so she would have been male, not female. So Eve has two X chromosomes. So you already know that if this is literally taking the rib of one organism, one person, Adam, and just refashioning it into a new body, you already know that it's not just the miracle of speeding stuff up or making development happen from some stem cells inside of Adam's rib. You know that God also had to have miraculously removed the Y chromosome. Oh, well, would you have to say that? You could say that Eve may have been actually XY, except for her sex cells. No, you don't even have to say that. I mean, you really don't. I mean, Eve could have been XY. And then her offspring from that only ever donated the X in her eggs and never the Y. So maybe God made sure that all of her eggs only had X's in them and never had the Y in them. All right, yeah. Obviously, we're speculating here, but you see what I'm doing though. We're really trying to apply, and think about the actual physical manifestation of what they're perceiving is happening, and the logic. I'm taking their logic and kind of like pushing it. Right. So typically what they said, I think what Sephardi says in his article is that, yes, what God must have done is he must have zapped the Y chromosome and then just duplicated the X chromosome. So for the other chromosomes, they could have been the same as Adam's, or maybe only took half the chromosomes, just like he's taking one rib, or if you go with my view, half a side. Then you're duplicating the other side. So, sorry, I'm really rambling here. And I'm trying to remember what my original main point about this is going to be, because I've kind of circled around to a couple different things and I've gotten on some tangents I didn't think I was going to go on. Okay, so the thing is, why AB? Why not O? Right? Why couldn't God have, if he's going to take a Y chromosome and duplicate the X chromosome, all right, replicate it? And some creationists will say that Eve had two different alleles at every position and Adam had two different types of genes at every position. Well, how would that happen? That meant when God took the material from Adam's rib, he would have to have changed every gene in Eve. At some point, you begin to ask yourself, if he's going to take material from Adam and you're going to say that Eve was built from the physical substance of Adam, but your argument is going to be that, well, he changed this, he did this, and he replaced all these different variants with different variants and gave Eve all these different features. It's sort of like, why start with Adam then? Why not just make Eve? all right, as a miracle anyway, since it's going to be a whole bunch of miracles to begin with. Which kind of brings me around to what's most important about that, the whole dialogue, which is the symbolism of what these things mean. But let's not go off on that tangent today. I'm going to leave it there. Just thinking about blood type, my main message was blood type is really complex, and there's lots and lots of different alleles. And so if I go all the way back to what Creation Ministries International is saying, is they're trying to say, like, O type, I know it's really common. It's not actually what was in the actual garden. Like Adam and Eve didn't have O type blood. We think O type blood is a mutation. So by the way, if you have O type blood, you're a mutant, right? You're the result of genetic entropy. You don't have what humankind was supposed to have, which was not have O type blood. But it's more than that. There's so many different types of O type blood. And so there's a lot of different mutations that have occurred. Now, I want to be quick to say that I don't know of any real negative aspect to having O type blood. If you have O type blood, there doesn't seem to be any health differences. It's not like you won't live as long if you have O type blood. In other words, if you're speaking in evolutionary language, the fitness of somebody who has O type blood, I don't believe is any different than having A type blood or B type blood. And so you can't really call that mutation a negative mutation. It's a change, all right? It's a change that creates a new variant, and that variant doesn't have an impact on the overall fitness of the organism, and so adds new variation to human beings. And that's why there's so many different O-type variants. And there's different A-type variants and different B-type variants. And so lots of new variants have formed if there was only two individuals that began the entire human population. All right, let's call it quits there for today. That's This Week in Creationism, episode number 42. There's a whole bunch of other items to talk about, but I have spent enough time on this, so I'll hold off on the others for another one. Actually, my next episode might be kind of a, this year in creationism, kind of a retrospective look back at what's happened among young Earth creationists, the big stories of 2022. But I also like to look forward to, hey, what might happen in the future? What are some of my predictions? I actually did a video midway through the year, halfway through the year, my half-year perspective, right? And I had some predictions then. So I'll be able to kind of look back at those predictions and sort of see how I did. And I'll come up with some new ideas for what I think young Earth creationism will look like over the next year and next 5 years. All right, so until then, talk to you later. Bye-bye.